Hello and welcome to the Hustle to Achieve podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by Clint Murphy. Clint has been the chief financial officer for a real estate development company called Mosaic and has been in the financial industry for the last 20 years. Thank you for joining us, Clint, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, I can give you the brief bio. So I am a father of two boys who in the last couple weeks turned 12 and 15. Been with my wife since 1995. We were married in '04, so it's been a long road together. And by day, I'm a chief financial officer, as you said, for a real estate development company. And at night, I would say now, I'm leaning into this, my friend. I am a content creator. So I create content on multiple platforms, primarily Twitter, my podcast, and a newsletter. And my wife repurposes a lot of that content across Instagram, LinkedIn, as the two platforms that she operates.
So let's go back to high school. I've read it somewhere that, or I've read it on your website specifically that you were really good at sports and you've always been a reader, but you were not really a studious student in school. So what was that journey like? If you and I were in high school, what was Clint like?
I was fun. I think I was the person that was always up for a game or a hangout or an adventure, and it was interesting because I was also that kid who crossed multiple groups, if you will. I'd be playing Magic the Gathering with what some people would call the geeks, but I'd also be on one of the jocks on the sports team. So it was that combo of I'm just going, and you'll probably get this in the content that I create. I've never believed in living by someone else's rules. Simply pursuing what I'm passionate about. So while I'm playing sports, you're my sports friends. While I'm playing Magic the Gathering with you, you're my Magic the Gathering friends. I never felt the need to say, well, because I'm in this group, I can't be in that group. And the one thing that I didn't really do was pursue actual school. To a large extent, looking back, I think there was probably a level of boredom. I wasn't feeling challenged and thought, I'll just cruise through this. And there was also a level of growing up without much money, lower middle class family. It never received the level of priority that I would suggest that a wealthier upper class kid probably would have received.
So, what kind of books were you into when you were a kid? Were you a non-fiction person? Were you a fiction person?
No, when I was a kid, I was pure fiction. Not pure fiction, but 95% fiction. And within that 95, I was 94% fantasy. And so I've probably read, we're coming up on, or we've just crossed 1,000 books, and probably 400 to 500 of them are fantasy books. And about 3 years ago, probably tied to the podcast, I converted from 80% fiction, 20% nonfiction to 100% nonfiction, or 95% nonfiction. So I rarely read fiction books anymore, largely time based. So maybe if there's a fantasy series, fantasy readers out there will recognize this issue. I'm still reading some series that I started in high school, and the authors decide they'll release a book every friggin' 8 years. So if one of those pops on the shelf, I'll go pick it up and say, okay, I'll dive back into this. Other than that, there's not really much fiction that I jump back into or grab off the shelf. Primarily because on the podcast I have to talk to an author every week. And so that's 52 nonfiction books that I'm reading, which doesn't leave a lot of time to say, well, let me put my feet up and read some fiction.
So 52 non-fiction books. It means that you're reading one book a week. That's right.
Yeah, on average, yeah.
Got it. Got it. So you just mentioned that you grew up in a low middle class family, and now you're financially free. So at what point in time did you make that realization hit you as to you want to change your life and you want to become financially free and not live the life that you've been living?
Well, it was interesting. I always knew I wanted money because there's something that a lot of readers will resonate or listeners will resonate with. When you grow up without money, it can drive you a couple different ways. Either you never really know what you can push for, or you say, F this, I'm not going to be the kid with no money. I'm going to make more money than anyone I know. And so I went that way. And what that looked like was always pursuing jobs that would pay me well and continuing to climb up the ladder. But probably for about a decade, what wasn't tied to that was smart financial decisions, a certain level of frugality, not spending your raises, pay yourself first, invest. And what that looked like was probably in my early to mid 30s. I had some career changes that drove me to think I never want to be in this situation for my family again. And at that point, I dove into financial independence and started reading everything I could about finance, not finance, but financial independence. So, how to save money, how to invest money, what are the rules, what are different things I should be thinking about. And by doing that, I started making different decisions. I stopped spending raises. I started investing them. I started going very hard at future casting my net worth, my cash flow, and started to make a lot more investments. And in a lot of ways, I made those investments at the right time, in the right place, and was very lucky in being successful with a lot of them.
So I really want to talk to you about, you just mentioned a very interesting point that you were placed in a very lucky point of time wherein you were in the right place at the right time. So how does one position themselves in that particular position wherein they're not only getting lucky, but they're in the right place at the right time? How does that one get to that point?
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that you put yourself in positions. A lot of people use the concept of increasing the surface of your luck area. So what does that look like? It means that I'm always adding new skills to my skill stack. I'm always adding strong relationships. I'm networking with people that I can learn from, grow with, and push, challenge, and support each other. And I'm studying different ways to make money and paying attention to what's happening in the world around me. So I'm approaching life from a very intentional perspective. There's very little, let's just see what happens. It's, this is what I want to happen. What are the different ways that I can make it happen? And how do I learn from people who have already done it? And the example of that is I've had the pleasure to work with some people who have made money in real estate in amounts that stagger the mind. You know, I've worked for someone who's become a billionaire through real estate, and when you've done that, you can you can be jealous and you can hate rich people, or you can look at it and say, well, what has this person done that I can do? What are the lessons I can take from what they've done? Now, clearly, I can't do it at their scale, but why can't I scale it down and do it at my scale? And the simplest example of that is you might look at a concept that I learned about 12 years ago, 13 years ago with real estate. And the person I was working for at the time said, buy in the path of progress. A lot of people will call that gentrification, and they won't know how to spot gentrification. And so his point is the path of the progress tells you what will gentrify. And so when you learn to start looking for that path of progress, yes, I can't buy 100-acre plot of land like he might be able to in the path of progress, but I can buy 2 or 3 homes. And if I'm right, I will get lucky and those homes will appreciate significantly in value. I can buy an apartment, or I can run an analysis that says, based on you have apartments have one pricing level. Townhouses are generally above it. If apartment prices move too much, people will just flip into a townhouse. Townhouse prices move a certain amount, and then you'll flip into a duplex. Duplexes move a certain amount, and then you're going to flip into single family. So before I buy in any one of those categories, what I would do is say, which categories have moved the most over the last X number of years, especially relative to their average. Therefore, which one is most likely to move in the next couple of years? Now, if I use the path of progress to choose the area that I want to go to, and then I use the rule around the bands of movement to choose the product type that I'm going to buy, there's a much higher chance I'm going to get lucky. And so that's when I say I got lucky, that's the way I was able to get lucky.
So your first job was an accountant at KPMG. How was that like? And also, when did you transition to a new field of career? When did you think that, okay, now I'm done being an accountant and I'm done with this particular field of profession. Now it's time to move on to the next one.
Yeah, KPMG was life changing. Life changing because, one, when you're an auditor, you increase your ability to learn. So learning has always been my greatest strength and my greatest passion. Prior to being the Growth Guide podcast, it was the pursuit of learning. So that has always been a passion, and you get a lot of that at the firms. You're also generally surrounded by very intelligent people, very hardworking people. Every city has a different number one firm. In our city, KPMG was the number one firm with about 40% of the market share. So pretty dominant. So if there was one firm I wanted to work for here, that was the one. And so I was lucky enough to get in and get hired by them. And the importance of those people is some of my greatest friendships today. I would say almost all of them in the real world, take out online, because I have some really strong relationships that are growing since I've become a creator. Some of the strongest relationships I have in my life are my friends that I developed while I was at KPMG. And so you find your circle, you find people who are pushing in the same directions you are. They're challenging themselves to be the best version of themselves. And they're also supportive. And I always come back to that. You want friends who can push, challenge, and support you. Friends who you can call in your darkest hour and say, hey, I need your help. And you get very few of those. You can have lots of friends, but you probably only have 2 to 3 friends who absolutely care about the results for you and who you can call when you're at your worst moment. And those are from KPMG. So that was a wonderful win. And I flipped around. I went from KPMG Canada to a couple of years at KPMG in Bermuda. I flipped out of accounting and did a couple of years as a production manager in a manufacturing facility. And then I came back to KPMG in Vancouver. So all in, I started at KPMG in 2000 and I didn't leave until 2010. And when I left in 2010, I equate it to green eggs and ham. I had tried to audit as a staff, as a senior, as a manager in Canada, in Bermuda. I did not like audit. I had to get out. And so I went into industry, and I had always had a passion for real estate. So I was lucky that the first role I took in industry was in real estate as a controller. And within about a year, I became their director of finance, stayed there for another year, made a mutual decision to part ways, and had a short stop somewhere else as a VP finance, and then ultimately ended up at the company I'm at now. I've been here for just about 10 years, 4 months away from that, 5 months away from that. And I became the CFO about 7 years ago.
Uh, when you're switching careers, and not just careers, when you're switching jobs, you basically tend to have a conversation with your partner, with your wife, and people around you, your family members, as to what you want to do next. So, what were those conversations like, and what important factors did you consider before basically agreed to switch jobs? What were the important things that you had to look into before you took that decision?
Yeah, I would say some of the important things that I would generally think about are, am I going to make more money? That's relevant. Am I going, but more importantly, take a step back from the money, because there's two different types of money. There's more money I'm going to make tomorrow, and there's more money I'm going to make in 10 years. And I want to focus on the 10 years. I always want to focus on decades over days. And so if I take this next opportunity, how is that setting me up for the next opportunity? There's certain roles that when you take them, there's no future. That's the role. And you'll be doing that role for 20 years. And that's fine if that's what you want. That is never going to be me. It's always going to be, okay, what skills am I learning? What people am I meeting? What experiences am I going to get? How can this help me be better at whatever I want to do 10 years from now? How can this help me continue to grow my career up into the right? And how can it fill my experience bucket with experiences that I want, and my skill stack with skills that I want? And now that I'm older as well, for any changes for me at this point, there would have to be a certain level of, what's the balance? I'm not young like you anymore, my friend. There's no, hey, I'm willing to work 14 hours a day at my day job and not see my kids, not see my wife. It's, I want to be home and spend time with them and their sports and their life, and help shape them, and be a voice of positivity in their head. So I would say now that would come into play. When they were young, it didn't come into play that much. And to some extent, that was a mistake.
You mentioned an interesting point over here. When you're young, you make a lot of, let's say, rash decisions, and you don't really look at the consequences, because you know that you don't really have a responsibility on your shoulder, and that you can, work as many hours you can, because you have all the energy in the world. And then you're married and you have kids, and you're aging. So how much of an impact do all of those responsibilities, especially after having kids, have on the next decisions that you're making, especially regarding the career choices that you're going to take?
Looking back, they should have an impact. They should have had an impact for me, and they didn't necessarily. Not until the boys were older. So you always hear on the deathbed, what was your regret? Well, I worked too much when I had children, and I will be in that category. People always told me that. I said, I love my job. I love what I do. The kids are young. I'll have time. And you never do. You never get time back. Time is the only scarce resource. And once your children cross a certain age, they live their life. They have their family. And so you think about your time with your parents for most of the listeners. And once you cross 19, your time with your parents drops. From the age of 19 on, I've spent 98% more time with my wife than I have with my parents. And now that I have my own children, I spend 95% more time with my children than I do with my parents. And so the tables flip. And it's the classic song, The Cat's in the Cradle. And if you don't make decisions with that in mind, you will have life regrets. That's almost 100% certainty. The days go slow, but the years go incredibly fast, and they go faster and faster as you live longer. So that would have been, if I look back, or if some young people are listening, I would say when you do have a family, start to take that into account. Now, here's the rub of that. Where I'm at in my ability to say that is partially driven because I didn't do that. And that's always a paradox, is most of the people that end up saying that are the people who a lot of the listeners will look at and idolize, which raises the question, are we idolizing the right people? Because those are the people who, when they get to a certain age, look back and say, I have so many life regrets. We tend not to idolize that person who knew what enough money was, who lived a life of purpose, who was there for their children and their family, who was there for their community and gave back and was happy because they had enough and they did those things and they had great relationships. And they don't look back on their life with a lot of regrets. So you wonder, who should we be idolizing?
So when you're making all those decisions, I believe that one of the most important decisions in life is also choosing the right partner for you, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually as well. So how much of an impact does having the right partner by your side has on your own life? And like, do you think how much do you think that has impacted your growth overall and your life as a whole?
Yeah, the person you marry will be one of the greatest financial decisions you ever make. And one of the people we were having lunch with a few weeks ago said a joke that his investing strategy was to stay married. And part of that joke is a lot of people who do go through a divorce, it's financially destabilizing for everybody in the relationship. And so if you want to grow your wealth over time, growing your wealth as a partnership is much better for two partners. Now, for me, I fell in love with my wife when I was 16. I started dating her when I had just turned 17. So this was very early on. And even though I was an okay student, the person I ended up dating was one of the top students in our class. And she was probably number two. She missed out maybe by one GPA, like a 93 GPA, and the valedictorian had a 94. So it was pretty close. It was straight A's from grade 8 through grade 12. Very hardworking, very studious, and a beautiful heart and a wonderful person. And so we started dating very young. And part of the decisions that drove my life, I originally started college as a psychology English major. And at some point she said, hey, like, you might want to do something where you can get a job right after school. And that decision led to becoming an accountant. So, when I look at what impacts has she had on my life, it's massive. She's been a bit of a guiding stone. And when you think about this journey to go from, and I still am a full-time employee during the day and a podcast and a content creator at night, you can't do that alone. Someone's still taking care of the house, of the kids, supporting me behind the scenes. So a lot of times when I talk about what we've built, I use we because it's a team. And you can only succeed if your relationship is a team and you work together. And so absolutely, who you decide that you will marry or partner with for the rest of your life is going to have a massive impact on the results of your life. And you will go generally so much further with that person than you will if you decide, I'm going to go it alone.
So, for let's say for all the young listeners out there who are listening to this, what are some of the most important factors that they should look at when they're when they have a partner with them and someone that they want to marry? What things should they consider before they uh, jump into the decision to marry them?
And it's going to change over time, but I would come back to what we talked about earlier with friendships. You want someone who pushes, challenges, and supports you. So they push you to be the best version of yourself. They challenge you to be better every day, and they support the decisions you're making, and they support you, and they're there for you in the good times and the bad. Ideally, there's someone who you have shared values with. You have shared belief systems. You're aligned on how the world works and should work and where you want to see it go. You're aligned on whether you want to have kids. And if you want to have kids, how you want to raise them. You're aligned on the vision for your life. Where are we going? What are we going to do? What are our careers going to look like? What do you want? What do I want? Do those mesh? Do we want the same things? You know, it was very beneficial that as bright as my wife was and as capable as she was, she said very early on in our relationship, I want you to work hard and make money. I want to take care of our family when we have one. She had come from an immigrant family, parents who had opened a restaurant, and they worked, I want to say 14 hours a day. Go in, open the restaurant at, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, stay there till midnight, come home, go to bed. So she never saw her parents growing up. She would make her own breakfast, make her lunch, get on the school bus, go to school, do her school, come home, go work in the restaurant. That's when she saw her parents, when she'd work in the restaurant. So her whole thing was, I need to be there for my children. I need them to have what I didn't have. So that was big. That allowed me to say, okay, I'm going all into my career. But you also want someone who, this is always hard, and you don't know this when you're young. You want to understand love languages, and you want someone who is expressive of their love language so that you can meet it. And they also recognize that your love language may be different than yours, and they're going to fill it. And so having someone who is like that, and then I like to say, conversationally, you can talk to for hours. You want to be with them more than you want to be away from them. And if you can find that, you're going to have a long, prosperous, enjoyable relationship. And you're
You just
attracted to
mentioned,
each other. That doesn't hurt.
so you just mentioned that your wife's parents, they were immigrants and they started a restaurant and they worked 14 hours a day. Whereas I wanted to talk about how was your family like? What were your parents like? What kind of conversations did you have on the dinner table that shaped the way that you are at this point of time?
Yeah, my parents, my mom was in accounting, but never designated. So worked her way up, bookkeeper, head of accounting, and worked her way up that way. From an earnings perspective, while we were young, it wouldn't have been a lot of money. My dad at that stage was all blue collar jobs. Eventually, he worked up to probably when I was around 11 or 12. He started working in the film industry in Vancouver full time as a teamster is what they call it. They drive the drivers, drive the cast and crew, drive the set deck, take care of all transportation for the show. And so his earnings grew steadily through high school and afterwards to reasonably high level. Very proud of what he achieved in his life doing that. But that wasn't while I was young, sitting around the dinner table. And I would say for the first decade of my life, he also drank pretty heavily. And then when I was 10, he hasn't drank for 35 years. And that made a massive change on his life. I mean, it's probably not unrelated that he stopped drinking and his career and life went in a totally different trajectory. And, I've never really gone back and looked at it that way. I stopped drinking altogether about 14 months ago, and it's been the most productive 14 months of my life. And my youngest was roughly the age that I was when he stopped. So it's probably not that different. So I would say around the dinner table, what are the main things that they taught me that carry through to today? One was, and I think this was pushed more by my mom, I would say intellectual curiosity. And so my love of reading was from my mother. My passion for reading was from my mother. The one thing she said, we might not have had much money, but there were two things that she would always find money for: sports and reading. And so if I wanted books, she would always either from the library or she would buy me the books that I wanted. So there was always that. There was also the concept to question. And what I mean by to question is, and this is the tweet I wrote yesterday, people want you to play their game by their rules. That's how society is wired. This is what you should do. You should go to this school. You should get these grades. You should leave to get this job. You should be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. And you should have 2.5 kids. And you should buy a home by this age. And you should, like, whose rules are these? Who is the person who's allowed to tell us these things? And why should we believe them? That was a big thing my mother put in me, is that I don't respect authority. I respect knowledge, critical thinking, logic, and intelligence, which all tend to go together. If you can talk to me in a way that can convey what I should do from a place of logic and critical thinking, and we can have a conversation on it, I'm going to respect that way more than if you just throw a rule at me that someone came up with that you don't even understand. It's just, this is the rule. She taught me to question that. And I think that's had a major impact on my life. Is anytime I've been in a situation where I'm working for someone or I'm reporting to someone who doesn't embody those traits, they more embody the you will do what I say because I say it, it doesn't last long. It can't last long. Because if you want to learn and grow and you want to develop, you have to work for people that are doing that themselves and who are coming at it from that approach. That was a big one. Work hard was massive. I mean, one of the biggest things you learn from sports and the amount of sports I played was to always work hard. Some takeaways I have from my dad, right? I say, get in the right room, because I work a pretty white collar job, but I say, have a blue collar work ethic. I never met someone who worked harder than my dad. Like, there was never okay. It had to be good. It had to be great. And you put in the time till it is. I mean, there was, growing up with less money, you think about construction projects around the house, you're not hiring a tradesperson. Like, how many unfinished basements did I build with my father? Hold the drywall in place, boys, while I screw it all in, and then we're mudding it, and then we're sanding it, and then we're painting it. And so I've spent years in bedrooms that I built with my dad. I've seen him build bathrooms, and he would always say he never felt like he was intelligent enough. And I look at it and say, how many people today, even with YouTube, do I know who there's no way they would build their own, like finish out their own basement, do the electrical, do the plumbing without YouTube, just figuring it out. And so I look at him and say, like, well, fuck, like, that was amazing what you did. You don't give yourself credit. So my dad taught me that was to outwork people, to work hard. And the other thing they always taught me was, stand up for people, stand up for what's right, do the right thing. Look at people and recognize every person, regardless of race, religion, color, creed, should have the same opportunity. And that if someone is being a bully, step in the middle of it. Say, hey, this isn't right. What you're doing is wrong. I'm not going to let you say these things to this person. I'm not going to let you physically do these things to this person. I'm going to put myself in the middle and stand up for these people. So, those are some of my, we could go on for days, but those are the big ones. And they pushed me, they challenged me, they supported me. And that's probably one of the reasons I think that's one of the most important things you can have in a friendship and a partnership.
Hmm. How much has the world changed according to you when you were growing up, when you were a kid, as compared to now when you have kids? Not in terms of like a broader perspective, but in terms of morals and ethics and overall like culture in terms of what they're being taught at school and how are they learning things. So how much what do you think has the world now become? How much of it has changed?
Well, it's light years. I mean, most of your listeners won't even understand this. I mean, I'm the generation that grew up analog, and by analog, everything was pen and paper. We didn't have electronic devices. We just started, when I was probably 8 years old, we got our first PC, right? And I say PC because it was this giant clunker of a thing that sat on your desk, and it was massive. Like, it took up so much space. It was one of those tube monitors that was 2 feet by 2 feet. Like, and we were early technologists, if you will. And you look at, there was no email, there was no cell phones, there was no text message, so there was none of what young kids have today. What there was go outside and play with your friends and come back when it's dark. Come back when it's dark. So what was our life like? It was crazy. When I think of my boys, and when I think of what I was doing, not even at their age, as an 8-year-old, what I was doing out on the streets, it was insane. There's almost no parents out there today would let their kids do the things we did. But what was that good for? That was good to build independence. It was good to build grit and resilience. Like going to construction sites where they were building homes and saying, we're going to play tag on a construction site. And people are climbing up into the rafters and running through the rafters. Like, kids today would go to jail for doing that. But that was normal back then. So it was fun. It was crazy. And I would say, how has it changed? I would say in some ways it's gotten better, and in some ways it's gotten worse. Today, I think too much, and we do this, too much of children's lives are scheduled and are organized. So you have your personal trainer at this time. You have your basketball academy at this time. You have your football, weightlifting, off-season training at this time. You have a tutor at this time. And then in the in-between time, what does the kid do? They jump on their phone, surf Instagram, and go play Fortnite with their buddies. There's very little of that, I'm just going to leave the house without a device and spend time with people. It's almost zero. And when you look at when we were kids, or when I was a kid, you didn't have all of these academies and tutors. You didn't have the programming that kids had. You had your sports equipment, and if you wanted to get better at hockey, you called your friends after school. I use hockey, Canadian sport. If you wanted to get better at hockey, you called your friends after school on the dial-up phone that you spin with your finger and said, hey, I'm motioning like I'm holding a phone, because that's what it was like when I was a kid. It wasn't a cell phone. And you said, hey, do you guys want to play hockey? Yeah, I'll call these 4 guys. You call those 4 guys. And you'd get together and you'd play for 4 or 5 hours. And that's how you got better at a sport. If you wanted to get better at basketball, you did that with basketball. And you just played with friends and got better. You might watch the game on Saturday night and see what an athlete did. But now these kids go on Instagram and they watch an athlete over and over, and then they go try to replicate that at their academy. So it's just a totally different world. I think people are becoming way more specialized, probably way too quickly. And they're playing in better at levels we never saw. even with technology, but they're missing some of the big critical pieces of what it means to live a good life, how to build relationships, how to be alone. No one's alone anymore. When I was young, like, if you didn't have a friend to hang with, you were alone. Like, there's only usually one TV in the house. Someone else had it. It's like, go hang out in your room by yourself. Learn how to read a book. Learn how to just sit and be okay with yourself. And so I think those are the things that are missing. So are there massive benefits to the technological run-up that we've seen over the last 20 years? Absolutely. Massive benefits done intentionally. There's also massive downsides. And the downsides tend to be a lack of connection, a lack of strong relationship, which leads to a high degree of loneliness, which leads to poor mental health. So those, I think, are the downsides. And the upsides are it's amazing what you can achieve with technology today.
So you mentioned a point earlier wherein you said that parents today, they're not letting their kids go out for, for the whole night, or when they're, they're basically being protective of their kids. But these are the same parents who grew up I'd say, in a rough environment, like you did, or even my parents did. So why do you think there's a shift in terms of in terms of mindset, wherein, parents are not letting their kids have the same experience that they did when they were young?
And it may also be constrained by the fact that when my wife always says this, and I sometimes ignore it. She's probably 98% correct. When she and I were young, we grew up in the suburbs, an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half outside the city.
Mm-hmm.
There was like 20,000 people. So you just went outside and did your thing.
Mm-hmm.
You played street hockey on the street in front of your house because there was no cars coming. And if there was, you move the net, move the net out of the way, the car goes by, you put the net back, you play for another couple hours. And somewhere in there, being successful, having the career, we moved from the burbs to the city, like right in the city. And so the idea of saying, hey, just go out by yourself as a 6-year-old, probably a bad idea. Probably shouldn't send them into a big city at 6 years old. And so I think that for a lot of people who have moved from the burbs to the city, they've maybe said, it's a different world. Let's act differently. The other part is it is a different world. Now, are the rates of bad things that happen to children up? Probably not. Are we way more aware of them than when they do happen? Absolutely. Amber alerts, the news, social media, missing kid, missing kid, missing kid. Holy shit, like I'm not letting my kid out of my eyesight. So I actually think the world is safer. I actually think the world is a better place. Mentally, most people think we're in a worse spot, in a worse time, and it's more dangerous. And so I think all of that shapes it, is that shifting digital world has made us so aware when negative things happen that we're worried that they could happen to our kids.
So, let's say when you were growing up and you saw your dad working blue-collar jobs and doing everything without the help of YouTube, let's say, and then when kids are growing up with the help of YouTube, let's say, they find everything as to, if they want to, let's say, uh, get help with plumbing, or, set up a device, or XYZ, anything. How much do you think is that helpful? Not in the sense that, not only in the sense that, it is actually helpful, but how much of it do you think that, your father, the way your father worked, helped him, and that would have helped more to the kids that are watching this right now, as compared to, getting all the education on YouTube, rather than just, just doing things on their own and fixing things up?
Pros and cons. The pros are it's so easy to just say, hey, Google it or YouTube it. Or nowadays, I think people even say TikTok it. So there are a lot of pros to that because you're always going to find the answer. And if you're always going to find the answer, you're going to be able to solve what you need to solve. There's so many things that my wife has learned through TikTok, or, you have a problem with your plumbing or a problem with the lighting and or a device, and you YouTube it and you fix it. Amazing. What you're losing is the critical thinking. What you're losing is the resilience and perseverance that you build by having to figure shit out. Oh, this is broken. I've just got to play with it until it works. Yeah, you waste hours, but you learn that you can figure things out. You learn that you can solve problems. And I see a lot of these people can't solve problems. So you take them away from something where it's Google and you go into the house and it's like something's on an upper shelf and they're like, I can't reach it. And it's like, well, figure it out. And they're like, well, you're taller than me. You go do it. And it's like, no, figure it out. You're 11 years old. If something's on a shelf and you can't reach it, figure it out. Like, simple answer. Grab a chair, carry it down there, stand on the chair and reach it. Like, but the immediate answer is, well, technology didn't tell me the answer. So like, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. I mean, if we ever end up in an apocalypse, like a zombie apocalypse, like this generation's screwed. Like you're not going to be able to YouTube. Well, you probably can because you can YouTube The Walking Dead. But assuming the power goes out, you're not going to be able to YouTube anything. Like learn how to be self-sufficient. Learn a little self-reliancy. And a large part of that is try to solve some problems without Google or YouTube telling you how to solve it. It's like playing a video game. Is there any joy in playing the game while you have the cheat code running on a YouTube video right beside you? Like the only joy in that would be telling your friends that you beat it before them. But did you beat it or did the YouTube video beat it and you just watched it while you played? There are certain things where I want the video and there are certain things where I want to play the game. And that would be a differentiation that I would look at with that.
Yeah, exactly. I believe that, you lose essence when you leave everything on technology as a whole. I mean, if you do not do things on your own, especially when you just, you gave the example of, you looking at a video on YouTube to basically figure out how to win a game, let's say a video game. So, I mean, it loses the essence. We lose out on the fun of, figuring things out on our own. You wrote a Twitter thread on men, being lost today. So what do you think are the challenges that men, especially younger men and even like the younger generation as a whole, they're facing today?
A big part of it is simply labels. We get told that men are bad. We get told that men are toxic, that masculinity is toxic, and that we cause all the problems. And when you're told something like that over and over, it can start to fester and it can start to boil. And what we're seeing that boil over. We're seeing a guy like Andrew Tate be the most Googled person in 2022. Now, are some of the things Andrew Tate says good? Absolutely. Are a lot of the things Andrew Tate says bad? Absolutely. And some of them he may say are taken out of context, but you can only be taken out of context so many times before you say, hey, your views on women are probably inappropriate. That doesn't mean that 80 to 90% of his views on men may be appropriate. What I see with a lot of young men today is this labeling of toxicity. It sort of made them draw into themselves and not put themselves out there, not stand up with their shoulders straight. We're seeing less men graduate from university. Women are performing at a much higher level. They're performing at a much higher level early in their careers. And so when you look at it, it's great that women have been going up the ladder on so many of these categories. But while they've been going up, you would hope that men would at least continue on the path they were on. And so you're both flourishing. But what we've seen is men are dropping on most of these categories. I think it's 3/4 of the people that kill themselves are men. Most of the people that die on the job are men. More mental health issues with men. Much greater degree of substance abuse, of homelessness, of suicide. Like, you go down the list, anything that you would think is like, oh, that's a shitty statistic. It's generally men who are on the shitty statistic side of it. And so when you start to add all of that up, what are some of the things I've seen in men's group working with young men? One of the things tends to be a lack of purpose. So, like, why am I here? What am I here for? What's my North Star that I should be reaching for? And when you're just starting out, that North Star can be pretty small. And as you grow and as you build your get shit done muscle, let's get a bigger and bigger North Star over time. 2, I have a North Star. I know where I should be going. Okay, well, what are your goals? Like, how are you going to get there? What's the goal? Okay, now take the North Star, turn it into 4 or 5 goals. Okay, well, you have goals. How are you going to achieve them? Oh, I don't know. I just thought I wrote the goal down on the page and it happened. Well, no, you need a plan. Know what you want. Understand what it takes. Do the work day in, day out. And so what I see in a lot of young men today, they don't know what they want. If they do know what they want, they don't know how to get it. I want this career, or I want this net worth. But they haven't done the work to say, well, what do I need to do step by step to get that? And then the third part is do the work. They're not willing to do the work. Because the work is not sitting there on your device. The work is putting the device away for 10 hours and going and getting shit done and then picking the device back up. But you have to be willing to put away the technology and get your shit done for hours on end consistently to achieve most of those goals. So those are, I always boil it down to know what you want, understand what it takes, do the work day in, day out, or in other words, vision, plan, work.
Just a final question before we wrap up. What was some of the, let's boil it down to what were the 3 main or 3 important decisions in your life that you've ever took, and also what are some of the important decisions that people need to take in order to take their life to the next level?
Yeah, I came to these 3 all through times in my life where I had major setbacks. And so I won't go into all the setbacks. I'll just boil it down to what are the key things that I learned in each setback. And what I like to do with this one is say, hey, we're all computers. We're biological computers. And if we're a biological computer, we need to think of ourselves that way. And we need to upgrade ourselves in the way you would a computer. So that's hardware, software, and operating systems. The hardware is our subconscious or our unconscious. We're going to get at that. And that's the hard wiring that happened up until, 10 to 12 years old that sits in the background and wires almost all of the major decisions we make without us even realizing it. Because we developed coping mechanisms as children to deal with our life in a way that served us then that don't serve us today. But we're not even aware of it. So I pushed myself relentlessly because up until 12, my dad didn't tell me he was proud of me. So everything I do, all the sacrifice, the burnout, is to hear my dad tell me, I'm proud of you. That's your unconscious. That's your hardware. We need to fix our hardware. You get at your hardware through psychoanalysis, through shadow work, through working with a therapist to uncover that programming, that hardwiring, so you can fix it. Number 2 is your software. So that's your conscious thinking. People say we have anywhere from 30,000 to 90,000 thoughts a day. Let's throw out 60. 90% or more of those thoughts are negative. And a large amount of them are recurring, repetitive thoughts. What you say to yourself is how you will live. If you never learn to recognize that voice, let it be, and let it go, you will never change your life. Because it will tell you you're not good enough. It will tell you you're an imposter. It will tell you you can't be successful. It will not tell you, let's get this shit done. We're a team. It's there to stop you. Stephen Pressfield calls it the resistance. And it's a large reason a lot of people don't start. That's your software. You have to upgrade your software. You are what you think. Your thinking is flawed. Fix your thinking. The last one is your operating systems. So if you've dealt with your hardware and you've dealt with your software, then it comes down to your operating systems. Know what you want, understand what it takes, do the work day in, day out. Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. What's my 10-year big, audacious goal? Let's break it down into 5-year chunks. Okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? Let's break that down into years. Where do I want to be at the end of this year? All right, let's break that down into quarters. What am I going to do every quarter to be successful so that I can hit that 1-year goal so I can get to my 5-year goal? All right, let's break the quarters down into months. What do I have to get done this month? All right, I see. Okay, I got a plan for this month. All right, what's the weekly plan? I know what I want to get done this month. Let's turn it into a week. What do I want to get done during the week? Once I know what I want to get done during the week, I can have a daily plan. And once I have a daily plan, I can say, all right, what are those habits that I need to have so that I have a successful day? So that my day stacks up into a successful week? So that my weeks turn into an amazing month? So that my months turn into a super productive and phenomenal year? And so that my years add up over the next decade to allow me to achieve shit I never even dreamed of 5 years ago. That's the big change, is breaking it all the way down to that. And so when you say, like, what do? Every day I read. Every day I write. Now every day I go for long walks with my dog. I'm thinking. I create. I publish. Every single day. Now, they might not go viral that day. They might not add up to much that day. But over the course of a year, what all of that adds up to is exponential. Over the course of 5 years, it's insane. I mean, you and I talked about it earlier. I still haven't quite hit the 2-year mark as a full-time creator on Twitter. And I couldn't imagine where I'm at now. Where it's going to be 3 years from now is astronomical. Like, I can't even, it's a level of exponentiality that I can't even think of today. Because everything I do will be better. The way I write, how I engage, the relationships I have. It will all be so much different in 3 years than it is today. And that's because of those three things. My hardware, I upgraded it. My software, I optimized it. And my operating systems are running on overdrive.
Hmm. That's amazing. I mean, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, maybe, when we are working throughout the week, let's say, and we are not able to function, at our, potential in a given day of the week, but that adds up over time. I mean, despite whatever the result, that may have been on that particular day, but I mean, it adds up over time and exponentially the results are astronomical. It's been a great conversation with you, Clint, and I learned a lot. I mean, I was here all the time. I just wanted to learn a lot from you. I absolutely loved and enjoyed every bit of this conversation. Before we go, could you please tell our listeners as to where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, for sure. I am on Twitter as I am Clint Murphy. And you can find me on my website, thegrowth.guide. That will give you access to all of our social media, to our newsletter, and to our podcast. Yeah, so that would be the best spot, thegrowth.guide.
Thank you so much for taking out the time and doing this.
Thank you for having me, brother. That was really fun.
Absolutely.